So I like to start this presentation off with a little bit of a history lesson. I know you're all League of Women Voters members, and so you all know how the Electoral College works, but I think it's always good to just ground ourselves for a minute and start with that. So the way that America elects the president now is by using the Electoral College. So on election day, when we cast our ballots over the weeks or months, potentially months ago, we weren't selecting directly the presidents. We were selecting a slate of electors who would represent our votes in the Electoral College. And the real vote for president is when they meet in December and pick who the next president is going to be. So 538 electors are the ones who cast their ballots and make that decision. States are allocated one electoral vote for every representative that they have in Congress. So every state starts with at least 3 for their 2 US senators and their 1 member of Congress, and then has an additional elector for every additional member of the House of Representatives. In total, there are 538 because we have 100 US senators, 435 House of Representative members, and the District of Columbia has been awarded 3 electoral votes via a constitutional amendment. So who are these people? We might not know who they are, and yet they're who pick the president. So the US Constitution gives explicit power to the states to decide the manner in which the electors are chosen. Specifically, it says, Article 2, Section 1 says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. So the Constitution doesn't say how those electors should be chosen. It gives free rein to the state legislatures to set the parameters for how those electors are chosen. So this is a power that the Supreme Court has termed a plenary power or an absolute power of the states. And they actually reaffirmed that in a ruling as recently as earlier this year, which was an 8-0 decision with 1 abstention for an conflict of interest. So currently, 48 states and DC choose electors based on whoever received the most votes in their state on election day. This is what we refer to as a winner-take-all law. So in California, if the Democratic candidate receives the most votes, they get all 55 of their electoral votes. Same thing in Texas. If the Republican candidate gets the most votes, they get all 38 electoral votes. What that doesn't represent is that if you are one of the 4.5 million Californians who cast your ballot for Donald Trump in 2016, or one of the 3.8 million Texans who cast your ballot for Hillary Clinton, your vote was effectively thrown out. It was not represented when the electors went and cast their ballots on behalf of your state. So state law is why on election night, we are all closely watching the vote totals in states like North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, as opposed to the national popular vote in which Joe Biden was ahead by 4 million votes on election night. And so these state laws are also how we end up with divergent elections, which is the term that we use when the popular vote winner is the Electoral College loser. So this has happened 5 times in our nation's history. So 5 of our 45 presidents have come into office without getting the most votes. Most recently, yes, it has denied 2 Democrats the presidency. And sometimes that makes people think that this is a partisan issue, but it's really not. We almost had a 3rd divergent election in the last 20 years. In 2004, if John Kerry had gotten 60,000 more votes in the state of Ohio, he would have won Ohio, won the Electoral College, and become the president despite a popular vote loss greater than Donald Trump's loss in 2016 in the popular vote. And 60,000 votes, I think because we're in the middle of the election, we understand that that's really not that many to be cast in one state to change the outcome of the entire country. So this leads to a lot of problems beyond the big one being whoever gets the most votes doesn't win necessarily, but it also means that campaigns are completely run in just a handful of battleground states. So in 2012, the campaign was entirely run in just 12 states. 2/3 of the 2012 general election campaign events, so not the primaries, but the general election, were in just 4 states. 38 states were completely ignored in that election, including 12 of the 13 smallest states, 9 of the 10 most rural states, Almost the entire South, the Northeast, and the entire West Coast were completely ignored. Same thing in 2016, 94% of campaign events were in just 12 states that year, and 2/3 of the events all boiled down to just 6 states: Ohio, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. This year, same thing, 96% were again in just 12 states. These states do shift a little bit over time, but it still means that 38 states are being completely ignored every single election. This year, Pennsylvania and Florida together received 37% of all general election campaign events. So battleground states do have this outsized power because they attract all of the attention during the general election. And the impacts go beyond campaigning and go into how governing happens. So Dr. John Hudak did his dissertation and found that overall, controlling for variables, including a state size and natural disaster relief funds, presidential election swing states received 7.6% more federal grants, worth about 5.7% more grant dollars between 1996 and 2008. This equates to a lot of money. If Tennessee, which was an average size state, if it had been a swing state in the 2008 election, it would have likely have received 300 more federal grants for a total of $60 million for every year leading up to that presidential election. Similarly, highly competitive swing states get twice as many disaster declarations as non-competitive states. There are a lot of factors that should be going into determining what states are able to get disaster declarations. The amount of infrastructure impacted, the ability of the state to deal with the natural disaster. Maybe they already had a hurricane in that area a month before and are really stretched thin for dealing with it. But you don't think that what state is going to help my political party win the next presidential election should be one of them. And that's ultimately what we have, is that we have these resources that all Americans pay into equally, and whoever's in the Oval Office is able to leverage those resources and specifically get them towards swing states so that it helps them or the person from their political party in the next presidential election. And so this all adds up to battleground states having a lot of power in the election. They get more campaign events, more federal grants, more disaster declarations, and they can sometimes help shape policy. So some examples of this: No Child Left Behind was proposed by a Republican candidate for president and was the largest federal action taken into public education in the history of our country. Now, the federal government getting involved in something traditionally run by states is not what you expect from a Republican candidate for president, right? But this policy was very specifically geared towards winning over the education-minded voters that were critical in the state of Ohio, and that was suburban moms. And similarly, when the Obama administration was running for re-election, they had a federal tax credit program to promote clean energy. Ohio companies got nearly 4 times the average that went to the other states, when again, it was going to be a critical battleground state that year. So states that happen to be closely divided during an election year do benefit from being a battleground state. Now, I know you all might be thinking, well, okay, but why would we want to give that up? You know, we were someone that the candidates came here this year. You're telling us we get this additional money. This seems like it might be a good deal. But the thing to remember is that this is fleeting. There's not really much room between you are a battleground state and see these benefits, or you are completely ignored with the other 38 states. Your issues don't get listened to, you don't get to see the candidates, they don't come and ask you what's important to the voters in your area, and you get completely ignored. And we see states can move very quickly from one category to the other. Colorado and Virginia were both swing states in 2016. No one was curious how those states were going to go this presidential election, and it was a foregone conclusion that they were both going to go for the Democratic candidate. And so, do you want to really just be relevant sometimes and hope that you're relevant again in 4 years in the presidential election? Or should every voter be relevant in every election, regardless of what state they live in? So the winner-take-all laws are the problem that lead to all of the things that I just talked about. They are what leads to that, because they lead to this inequitable system where we don't have a national popular vote. But the winner-take-all laws are state laws that we can change. And we do this, just by passing a different state law. So that brings us to how we should elect the president. I certainly believe, and it's the belief of my organization, is that whoever gets the most votes should become the president. This is how we elect almost every other office in the country, and it's time we modernize our presidential elections to make every vote equal. Every vote being equal would mean that candidates would have to care about the entire population's interest, not just those in swing states. We wouldn't disproportionately hear about fracking because it's important to Pennsylvania, which there are more people in the logging industry in Oregon than there are employed by the fracking industry in the entire country. But you don't hear about that. Similarly, we don't hear about the wildfires caused by climate change that affected states representing 1 in 4 Americans this year. That wasn't something that we heard about. So we have really big issues that are being completely ignored because they're not as relevant to the swing states. So with a national popular vote, we break this system and we make it about the people instead of the interests of certain groups in certain states. So the national popular vote bill would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and DC. This is passed by states to change how they vote in the Electoral College. So it's a reform of the Electoral College in order to achieve a national popular vote. It works by replacing the current, North Carolina law is whoever gets the most votes in our state gets all of our electoral votes. We replace that state law with a new law that says whoever gets the most votes nationwide is who our electors will vote for. But it has a kicker. This bill only goes into effect when enough states around the country have come together and said, yes, we want to change the way we elect the president. We're all going to pass this bill. And once we have 270 electoral votes committed to this interstate compact, that is when our bill goes into effect, because that is the majority of the Electoral College. This bill would allow us to have the presidential election reflect the true will of the American people. We are a compilation of very diverse people with diverse opinions who happen to live in certain states. And right now, the voices of states are elevated over the voices of the people. And I know when I cast my ballot on election day, I think about what's most important to the entire country. I do it as an American, not as an Oregonian or a Pennsylvanian or a Floridian or as anywhere else that someone might live, but as an American. And the National Popular Vote Bill allows our electoral system to reflect that reality. And so that we have the one office that represents all of us actually be selected by the people. So hopefully this doesn't sound too far-fetched to you. And if it does, I have good news, is that this bill has already been passed by 15 states and DC with 196 electoral votes. So we are actually over 70% of the way towards making this bill a reality. 4 states passed our bill in 2019. It was one of our best years. It was the best year that we've ever had for national popular vote in terms of state passage. And you'll see that North Carolina is orange on this map. So we passed one legislative chamber a number of years ago, almost a decade ago, but haven't had as much interest in the bill since then. But think that it's now in a position where North Carolina could be one of the next states that passes this bill. We're really hopeful your neighbor Virginia will be the next state to pass it in early 2021. And we want to work with as many people as possible to make sure that we make this a reality in North Carolina. This bill is, just so you know, has been explicitly supported by the League of Women Voters US, and I've had the pleasure of working with League members, all across the country on this issue. So there's a lot of questions that come up that are the most common ones that I get. So I'm going to run through the answers to those, and then I'll open it up for questions from you all. So This is a nonpartisan solution. This bill was in existence, and our organization was working on this and passing it in states a full decade before the 2016 election. So it's not a reaction to that election. It's not a left or right issue. It's an American issue that puts the voters first, that we think everyone can and should get behind. This is an interstate compact, and sometimes, especially some very astute league members will say, well, isn't there something in the Constitution about interstate compacts and congressional consent? Yes. So Article 1, Section 10 says that congressional consent is required for interstate compacts. However, for over 100 years, the case law from the Supreme Court has been to set a rule saying that congressional consent is only necessary for compacts that encroach upon or interfere with the just supremacy of the United States. So this is an agreement among states and is in fact utilizing a power that is explicitly granted to the states in the Constitution. So we do not believe that congressional consent is needed. That being said, if after our bill reaches 270 electoral votes, the Supreme Court decides to overturn 100 years of precedent and say, nope, you need congressional consent, that's okay. We will go and lobby Congress the same way that we have lobbied all 50 states on this issue. And I will say the Supreme Court case that came out earlier this year, that was the 8-0 decision, also would lend support to our argument that we don't think congressional consent is necessary because it's such an explicit power and a far-reaching power of the states to award their electors pretty much however they want. And states are able to withdraw from the compact. However, they cannot do so during a really important 6-month period between July 20th of an election year and January 20th the next year. So that 6-month time frame includes when both, or I should say all parties, meet and nominate their candidates, the entire general election, the day that we all vote, when the electors meet, and all the way up until when the ballots are cast and the next president is sworn in. So states cannot withdraw during that time period to try and essentially game the system. You know, people sometimes fear, oh, if it looks like the Republican's going to win the national popular vote, a big state like California, it's a Democratic trifecta, they're going to pull out in October and throw the election upside down. That cannot happen. It's in the text of our bill that you cannot withdraw during that time period. And that's something it's not enforced by us or a governor of a particular state or a secretary of state, but it's enforced by the impairments clause of the US Constitution. And no state has ever left an interstate compact without adhering to the terms of the compact in the history of our country. And there's often questions about the framers and what would the founders of the nation think about this? And so when this question comes up, I think it's really important to revisit the fact that the way we elect the president now is nothing like it was at the beginning of the country. We use the structure of the Electoral College, but the way that states work within it is completely different. In our first election, only 5 states allowed a very limited type of citizen of white property-owning males to vote for president in any form. The other 7 states had either governors or the state legislatures directly choose the electors, so people weren't able to vote at all. It wasn't until the 10th election for president that a majority of states used winner-take-all laws like we are familiar with today, meaning that most of the founders were already dead and had been for over a decade by the time that came commonplace. Winner-take-all, the way that 48 states use the Electoral College now, wasn't debated at the Constitutional Convention. It wasn't even thought of. And in fact, James Madison introduced a constitutional amendment trying to ban winner-take-all. Obviously, it did not get very far, but he saw it as such a big problem that he wanted to not allow states to use it when it did start to become used more by more states. So another thing that people think is, isn't the Electoral College supposed to protect the small states somehow and give them more of a voice? So one is no, that's not really why it was created exactly. That's what the US Senate is for. But the small states don't actually have an advantage under the current system. If you look at the states, the 13 smallest states, so with 3 or 4 electoral votes, they are among the most disadvantaged group of states because they are all decidedly Republican or decidedly Democratic. And power in this system comes from being a closely divided swing state. So sometimes New Hampshire is relevant because sometimes it's a swing state, but overall the smallest states are completely ignored. Otherwise, if small states had an advantage, we'd hear about candidates crisscrossing between Wyoming and Delaware and Hawaii and Alaska and Montana, but we don't. It's a fair thing to think because it relates to the weight of how many voters you have compared to your electors. But because of the winner take all law, no one really gets an advantage or a disadvantage from that system because states are decidedly one for one candidate or the other, and the entire campaign is run in just a handful of states. And this is something that, you don't have to take just my word for it. We've had the state legislatures in 5 states pass our bill because they recognized that it would make or in 5 small states, excuse me, pass our bill because they recognized it would make their citizens more relevant. And when we're thinking about what a campaign would look like under a national popular vote, we know that candidates would go all over. They would be forced to campaign in all 50 states. We've looked at where candidates go within battleground states, because when you're within a battleground state, every vote can help you win that election. And it'll be like that on a national scale. And if there was a tendency for candidates to overemphasize metro areas, we'd see it within those battleground states. But we've looked at it for the 2000 through 2016 elections, and there was no evidence of them overemphasizing metropolitan areas. They go where the people go, and the people are all over. Sometimes there's a lot of misconceptions that people have that, oh, the big cities are going to control the election. And again, I think that this comes from a really misunderstanding or just a lack of information about really where the American people live. If you add up the 100 largest cities, which number 100 on that list is Spokane, Washington, 208,000 people. The 100 largest cities only make up 19% of our US population. It just so happens that rural America, as defined by the US Census, also makes up 19% of the US population. So you wouldn't be worried about a candidate just talking to rural voters, right? And so when you look at the numbers, you shouldn't, by the same reasoning, you shouldn't just be worried about them talking to the voters in the big cities. They've got to talk to everyone, and especially the 60% of people who live in the suburbs, where people are evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. So under a national popular vote, we won't have swing states, we won't have safe states, we won't have flyover states. We'll have voters. The people will make the decision. And whether you are in rural North Carolina or downtown LA, your vote will be equal to every American. And your vote has the ability to be the one that changes the outcome of the president, which is something that only people in swing states have right now. If this is something that you are interested in, the number one thing you can do is write your legislator. If you go to nationalpopularvote.com/write, WRTITE, you can put in your zip code and your address, and we'll link you to a form to write your legislator. And then certainly if you want to get involved with volunteering, would love to have you all as well, and hope that you'll consider, potentially endorsing this or supporting this for the League of Women Voters of Moore County. So thank you very much for having me on today.
Okay, can you guys hear me now? Did I unmute? Great. I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully I can get like a regular. Oh, now all of a sudden I see your screen. Okay. All right. I'm going to ask people if they have questions to put it in the chat. We do have one question in the chat already from Tina Ganis. How do we get around the idea of zero-sum game problem?
Yeah, so that's part of why our bill is an interstate compact, and that the bill only goes into effect when enough states have come together to change the system. Because we know that there's not really the political motivation for one state on their own to say, I'm going to have my electoral votes go to the national popular vote winner, because it's just not something that's going to change the whole system. It's not going to make your state relevant suddenly. And so that's why our bill has that. It's a contract, and it only goes into effect when enough states have signed on that it is guaranteed to change the system. So I hope that answers your question, Tina. And if not, I'd be happy to follow up. And
go ahead.
Oh,
sorry.
I saw the next question. So I was
okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I will definitely send the PowerPoint to you, Jay, afterwards.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a couple of questions myself. So what do you think about, so let me back up and say that I first heard about National Popular Vote when I attended virtually the League of Women Voters national meeting in June, I guess it was, or May, whenever it was. And I also attended a caucus on this and on abolishing the Electoral College. So what is your position on abolishing the Electoral College? And I understand that that would be a long-term solution. Why could there not be a dual path?
Yeah. So the League of Women Voters US supports both of those proposals. Our organization, we just focus on having a national popular vote through the Interstate Compact. We believe that this is the only way we're going to get this bill done by 2024, certainly. And there have been over 800 amendments to amend or abolish the Electoral College, more than anything else in the Constitution. Only one of them has been successful, and it just changed a few things, but overall we still have it. So our organization supports this because honestly, the Interstate Compact and the way that it works within the Electoral College is how we've gotten bipartisan support for this issue across the country. That's how we've gotten state legislators to say, oh, I'm nervous about this idea, but I like the fact that if for some reason there's an unforeseen consequence, we can withdraw and go back to the old system. My personal belief is that that's not going to happen, that there's not going to be some unforeseen consequence, and that after we have our first election like this, more and more states are going to add on. So our organization only supports the compact, but I would not be surprised if, like how women got the right to vote, if the passage in states built the momentum eventually to a constitutional amendment.
A couple more questions in the chat. Are there examples of states using the Interstate Compact? And then that says COVID, et cetera. I'm not sure what's that. And then something about what sort of email that you just told us, Anne. I don't know whether you want to clarify that question a little bit.
Okay. I assume other states are getting together for other reasons, such as to solve COVID. Is that correct? And is that considered an interstate compact? Now, this whole thing to me is like going around the Constitution, and I'm a little uncomfortable with that. But if states are working together officially to solve problems, then maybe it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great question. So every state is in, on average, at least 30 interstate compacts.
Wow.
And we just don't hear about them because they're passed the same way that other state laws are passed, just at your state legislature. And it works as a contract between the states. So an example, all 50 states are a part of an interstate compact sharing information around sex offenders. Lotteries are conducted between states using interstate compacts. Driver's license registries. So there's a lot of examples like that. And it's also how water rights are shared. But that's an example of like where water rights and commerce comes in, that congressional consent is needed. But when it's just an agreement among states about things that don't really touch on anything international or commerce, then they can just enter into them without congressional consent. There aren't any for COVID. There's a lot of, honestly, because I think of how much of an emergency situation it is, there's a lot of agreements and coalitions building between states, but you're not seeing it at the level of interstate compacts.
And how does your organization influence North Carolina legislators?
Yeah, So we work to meet with all members of the North Carolina legislature. So we've been working with Jack Cozart he's a Democratic lobbyist, and Harold Brubaker, Republican lobbyist, and we work with them. And the national members of our team meets with everyone. So our Republican lobbyists meet with all the Republicans, Democrats meet with all the Democrats, and works to explain this bill. The state legislators, they've honestly never usually been asked to change this kind of bill before. It's something that sometimes they're unfamiliar with. They're a little hesitant about change. And so we work to get meetings with them to explain this bill. And we've been doing that for about the last 6 months. And I think so far we've met with about 70% of the current legislators to walk through the mechanics of the bill. But then when it comes to, the effective, like the grassroots lobbying side of things, education programs like this to get people informed about it. And then we'll definitely be putting out messages when there is a bill, when there's hearing potentially, if there's any upcoming votes, to alert people to that as well.
Do you have any organizers that are in North Carolina that are really shepherding this, other than the 2 lobbyists that you talked about? I guess what I'm asking is there like an organization within North Carolina, like a sub part of your organization?
That's a good question. No. So our organization, we tend to try and build coalitions within the states. And so Common Cause has endorsed this bill, the ACLU. So we bring those groups together around a coalition, but we don't have chapters in each individual state.
The other question I had is, what are the main obstacles that you have, and what are the arguments against going forward?
The main obstacles to passing the bill, or yeah. Okay. Inertia. One is that legislators don't like to change. Sometimes the biggest hurdle that people have wrapping their heads around is the idea of, okay, let's say this bill is in effect in 2024. North Carolina votes for the Republican candidate, that they get the most votes in their state, but the national popular vote candidate was the Democratic candidate, was the winner. And so then North Carolina will see your electoral votes going to the Democratic candidate, which is not who most of the people in your state voted for. And so that's the biggest objection. But I mean, that is the policy choice presented by our bill, is recognizing that it might mean that your electoral votes sometimes go to the candidate that your state didn't vote for, in the interest of making your voters relevant in every election, making every vote equal, and guaranteeing the presidency to the candidate who gets the most votes. So that's definitely, I would say, the biggest objection that people have. But I think it's one that that's a fair question to ask. And then people should think about, well, do you want to be relevant in every election? And do you want to see candidates campaign in all 50 states? And do you want to see the system changed?
The other question I had is, it's kind of a minor one, but are state legislators allowed to make any wording changes to the bill? What prevents that from happening? That's
a good question. So because it's an interstate compact, it is the same 888 words in every single state that it's introduced in. So just like if you're buying a house, the contract that you sign has to be the same as the contract that the person who's selling it to you signs. So because that's the reason that the bill is exactly the same in every state. So state legislators cannot make changes to it. What changes that we can see that are a part of the bill but aren't really a part of the bill text is they could pass something that at the end of the bill says this will only go into effect after 2024, or something like that. But the overall text of the bill is exactly the same.
I have a question. Why would it be more beneficial to think about apportioning votes in states rather than assigning them all?
Yep. So there are 2 other ways that are often proposed for a way to change the way that states vote in the Electoral College. So one of them is proportional. So that I'm going to use my state of Oregon as an example. We typically break about 55% for the Democratic candidate and 45% for the Republican candidate. If our Democratic trifecta state legislature passed a law saying we want it to be broken down proportionally, we know that it would be a safe bet that 4 of our electoral votes of our 7 would go to the Democratic candidate and 3 would go to the Republican candidate. No state currently uses this system because you're asking in most states, very partisan individuals. That's why we elected them. They represent one party or the other to give up power on the national level to the opposing party. And you're not getting the system changed nationwide. So that's why we haven't seen any momentum towards that, because there's not that willpower. And it's the same thing with Republican states. They're not going to want to cede some of their, what are currently now guaranteed electoral votes to the Republican candidate to the Democratic candidate. Overall, that if states did that, it still doesn't make every vote equal. And you'd know, just like the example I gave in Oregon, we know that that's what the electoral votes would be. And so you'd have the campaign then, if all 50 states switched over to this, you'd still have it just be in a handful of states where a couple of electoral votes are up for grabs. And in most cases, it would be the really large states. So you'd see California, New York, Illinois, Texas, Florida would have one or two electoral votes that could go one way or the other, and the majority of the campaign would be run there. The system that Maine and Nebraska use is that whoever wins each congressional district or gets the most votes in that congressional district gets one electoral vote for that district. And then whoever wins the most votes nationwide gets the most votes statewide gets two electoral votes. This system, it's sometimes, I think it's very fair to think that it makes those states more relevant, because we saw Joe Biden won a district in Omaha, Nebraska. Donald Trump won a congressional district in Maine, and they both saw, I think, one presidential election or one general election visit each. But nationwide, if states were to switch over that, number one, there is nothing that will incentivize gerrymandering of congressional districts more than making not just the House of Representatives at play, but an electoral vote for the US presidency at play. Now, if that argument is not compelling to you, then the other arguments against it are that it still doesn't make every vote equal. In both 2016 and in 2012, if we had used the congressional district system all across the country, in 2012, Obama would have lost. And in 2016, we still would have had a divergent election where Donald Trump was the US president. So those systems are definitely fair to debate, but they don't make every vote equal. They don't change the system on the national level, and they don't guarantee the outcome to the national popular vote winner.
Anybody else have any questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. So it's a lot to wrap your mind around. So I really appreciate you coming. It's really enlightening. I think that, at least for me anyway, this was kind of like a new thing when I heard it at the national convention back in June. So it might be new to a lot of our members too. And, I think everybody's got to think on it a little bit, but thank you very much, Eileen, for coming and introducing us to this very important topic.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
I think we're probably pretty much ready to wrap up. Joan, is there anything else that that we need to talk about? Oh, I wanted to talk about upcoming events. So our next board of directors meeting is going to be on December 1st, 9:30 via Zoom. Anybody's welcome to come. Any members welcome to attend any of those meetings at any time. I don't send the link out to everybody, so if you want to attend, you have to let me know. And then our next meeting our next general meeting will be January 19th at 11:30. And we're going to have a panel discussion on healthcare issues in Moore County. I don't know, Peggy Crawford, do you want to say anything more in detail about that as an advertisement for January?
She's still on.
Maybe Peggy had to
Eat lunch.
She may have had to, I don't see her name up here anymore, so she may have had to leave, but Peggy is organizing that. And I know we're going to have at least 3 people from First Health be talking to us, or maybe somebody from the Department of Health as well. I guess if there's nothing else, I just want to wish everybody a really happy holiday season as much as possible in this crazy year.
Jay, Chris Gannis has her hand up.
Okay, Tina.
Hi, we're having an HCLAT kickoff meeting by the pool at Knollwood at 2:30 this Friday. So it's never too late to join an LAT, and this would be a great time to join if anybody's interested. If you can't attend an in-person meeting, let me know and I will bring you up to speed.
Thank you, Tina.
Okay.
Healthcare,
Oh,
big issue.
Linda has her hand up, Jay.
Okay, Linda, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you all. I just wanted to announce that right now at this moment, I got Georgia on my mind, and they're asking people to do postcards. And so I have sort of volunteered Moore County NAACP to do postcards. I requested 300 cards from Georgia that they have a postcard committee. They're doing a wonderful job down there trying to get people out to vote. Very important election. There's another election runoff there that nobody probably don't know about it, but it's called public services, so like the utility or light bill, something like that. But anyway, if anyone is interested in doing postcard, once I get them, I will, contact you, email me and give me your email, and I will contact you and connect with postcard. And they're pretty beautiful cards that they're looking at. Thank you.
And I'll just add into that I actually saw the postcards and they're nonpartisan. They're just to get out the vote. So if people want to participate in that, don't feel like you're working on a partisan issue. It's a nonpartisan thing. So thanks, Olinda.
Yes, ma'am.
Kelly's asking a question. Oh, Kelly needs to unmute.
Yep, she's still muted.
Can you unmute her, Jay?
Kelly, let me see if I can find her on my list.
Just tell her to unmute.
She can't hear it well. Kelly, can you unmute, please?
Just got it. Just got it. Oh, Linda, could you just give us your email address?
Yes, she is. Oh, Linda, you need to unmute.
Now I need to unmute. It is ODW3220@gmail.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I also do want to bring to the attention in the chat, Holly Powell, way in the beginning, put up a flyer about open enrollment for health insurance from the marketplace for ACA. So it ends on December 15th. So you can email her if you want information about that. I want to make sure I caught that. Oh, they got another message. Okay, that's Olinda's email address. So, okay. Going to be a weird holiday season. I don't know about you all, but I know my family have decided that we will be having our holiday celebrations just here at our little house without traveling and seeing our extended family. So that's feeling a little sad for me, but hopefully you all stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you in January. Thanks for joining. And hopefully one of these days we'll be in person.